7 o'clock, we'll go ahead and call this Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda, roll call.
Yes. Commissioner Donaldson?
Here.
Commissioner Kent?
Here.
Commissioner McLeod?
Here.
Chair Waddy?
Here. Great. Item 3, ex parte communications. Do any commissioners have any ex parte communications to disclose?
None.
Seeing none, great. We'll move on to item 4 on the agenda, which is our consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered routine and will be enacted on by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the commission. There'll be no separate discussion of these items unless a member of the commission or a member of the public requests to remove one of these items from the consent calendar. First up is item 4-1, Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes from July 24th. Item 4-2, Planning Application 19-042, Design Review for a Single-Story Rear Addition at 1056 Pomona. And item 4-3, Planning Application 19-033, Design Review for a Lower Level Conversion at 958 Neilson. Any member of the commission want to remove any of these items? Any members of the public? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed. Do we have a motion?
Move approval of the consent calendar for September 11th. I'll second.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Seeing none opposed, those consent items have been approved. And for, none of those have story polls. Great. Please do note there is still a 14-day appeal period for both of those planning applications. Moving on to item 5, general public comment. This is the period of time for folks in the public to address the commission on an item that is not otherwise on the agenda. There is up to 3 minutes per person to speak. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on public comment? Seeing none, item 5 is closed, and that will take us to item 6 on our agenda, which is discussion and possible action on matters on the regular calendar. So first up, we have item 6-1, Planning Application 19-037. This is a design review and variance for a new 2-story single-family home at 1198 Curtis.
Correct. Good evening, Commission, members of the public. Once again, before the Commission tonight is Planning Application 19-037, Design Review and Variance for a new 2-story home at 1198 Curtis. Some background on the property. The subject property is an 8,176 square foot vacant lot located in the R1 zoning district with the water course overlay. The subject property has been subdivided from the adjacent property located at 1196 Curtis, and that was done in 2010. The subsequent parcel was sold in 2013. The Planning and Zoning Commission at the time held a study session in 2016, though the project approvals were never granted. The current property owner purchased the property in May of 2019 this year. During the 2016 review, the applicant proposed to cantilever a portion of the building into the creek setback area and thus applied for a conditional use permit. At the time, the commission expressed greater support for a variance to reduce the rear yard setback rather than allow an encroachment into the setback area. The project was last reviewed at the July 10th Planning and Zoning Commission hearing. At the hearing, the applicant was seeking design review and a variance approval for the 2-story home. The applicant received feedback from both the commission and the surrounding neighbors regarding privacy impacts, daylight preservation, obstruction of views, and the proposed density being low, in addition to preservation of mature trees and the lack of a landscape plan. Here's the street view of the vacant lot as it sits today. And project requests. Once again, the applicant is seeking design review and variance approval to reduce the rear yard setback from 20 feet to 14 feet. This would result in a new 4-bedroom, 3.5 bathroom, 2,194 square foot, 2-story home with a maximum height of 28 feet. Since then, the project has been modified. The applicant has modified the project since the last review with regard to the concerns expressed at the hearing. Those modifications include the inclusion of a landscape plan, vegetation screening along the rear yard, a modified rear yard setback, which was previously proposed at 12 feet and is now greater at 14 feet. Hence, greater compliance is now being proposed before you tonight. Consequently, this results in a reduction of the FAR from 28% to 26.83%. Various vegetation is proposed throughout the site, and an architect letter, which was attachment 5 of the staff report, was submitted to staff. Here's the proposed site plan. You'll note the clouded change for the 14-foot rear yard setback. And here's the proposed landscape plan. And this is the proposed front elevation of the two-story home. And then the 3D renderings, which were seen at the last commission hearing as well, showing the proposed siding and materials, as well as massing and parking in the front driveway. Parking. The proposed home will include a driveway pad to accommodate 2 off-street parking spaces in a side-by-side configuration. Thus, the applicant is complying with the off-street parking requirements. Overlay districts. As mentioned at the last hearing and with our other projects, this project is located in the watercourse overlay, and thus special provisions are required as directed by FEMA. The subject property is subject to Section 2024-030G1, which requires that all structures shall not be located 20 feet from the top of natural creek bank. The applicant is proposing to comply with the specific provisions. No construction is proposed within the required creek setback area. Additionally, Section 2024-030G3 of the zoning code states that new construction of structures located in this zoning overlay shall follow Section 2052 of the Albany Municipal Code. And that section states that in an AO zone, the elevated above the highest adjacent grade to the height exceeding the depth number specified in feet on the firm map by FEMA, or at least 3 feet above the height adjacent grade. Staff has confirmed that the minimum height the lowest floor should be raised for this home is 3 feet. The applicant is proposing to comply also with this code provision. And here's the proposed elevation indicating that 3-foot raise of the finished floor right here. And additionally, here's a snapshot of the firm map from FEMA's website. Variance. The subject property is restricted additionally with a 5-foot rear yard storm drain easement, private access easement, and an additional setback requirement of 20 feet from the top of creek bank in the watercourse overlay district. Due to the myriad of regulations on the subject site, the applicant is thus seeking a variance from the Planning and Zoning Commission. The applicant is proposing a 14-foot rear yard setback where 20 feet is required in the R1 zoning district. And here's just a site plan showing the subject parcel and with the actual buildable area with strict compliance with the zoning code. Variances. Variances are typically challenging to process as they have very strict criteria that must be satisfied. Section 20-100-040 of the AMC specifies 6 findings that need to be made to grant a variance. These findings were outlined and described within the staff report. Staff has received 2 correspondences after the commission packet went out and was forwarded to the commission this evening. They've also been placed on the dais for you to read ahead of the hearing. The first correspondent expresses desires for the applicant to honor the 20-foot required rear yard setback, and the second correspondence expresses concerns with the rear yard and tree removal on site. The proposed project is categorically exempt from CEQA review. And recommendation, the staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission review and approve the proposed project subject to the findings and conditions of approval. And with that, staff is happy to answer any questions, and I see that applicant in the audience as well.
Are there any questions for staff from commission?
Yeah, I wasn't here the earlier hearing for this project. I guess I was just wondering, what was the private easement in the front? What is that?
There was a private access easement for vehicles, we're assuming, with the adjacent parcel, and so that's recorded in the site survey as well.
Otherwise, no questions for other questions for staff.
Then turn it over to the project applicant if you'd like to come on up and provide a brief presentation.
Just sitting next to the neighbor at the rear, and we were talking about the landscaping and the privacy and the mitigation of, if we're asking for a reduction of our variance due to the extreme, let me say it again, extreme constraints that all the other adjacent properties don't really have. If I could just underscore that real quick. The adjacent properties are largely rectangular lots. It's far easier to get the 20-foot rear yard. They meet all the other setback requirements while still possibly approaching a 0.55 floor area ratio. This project, if you compare it to the project next door, it's 5,000 square feet. That would, the resulting square footages of the next door is something like, it's about 2,750. So we're actually under that. And so we're asking to reduce so that we can actually do something that fits all the space. The last meeting I was asked to do what I could to reduce the pool back as much as possible while, and I consider the needs of the spaces inside, the furniture, and more importantly, the ability to move around the furniture and to result in space that works. So the reduction, the concern, and I appreciate it, is that, the building wall and not meeting being a little closer to the rear property line and the privacy. And so we were just talking, what's your name? I'm sorry. Kathleen. She owns the property, her daughter, Cloud, and lives in it, and lives there, and they're very concerned about the privacy, and that's also my concern. And so that's why, if we could pull up the slide that shows the landscape, that'd be great. So already there are, and again, the existing planning, I didn't really show on my site plan all of the existing trees. The main ones are the biggest ones, but then there are some smaller trees but essentially they line the rear property line. So there already is an existing screen. And what I'm also additionally proposing is to add some additional trees, additional plantings. Pacific wax myrtle won't be as tall, but will provide an additional 6 to 8 feet of screening. So that's one thing I wanted to underscore. And then just lastly, I just want to mention that again, I want to say that this amount of volume of this building, it's not huge. It is comparable. It's less than what sits on, or what could sit on the property next door, should they, expand to their 0.55 FAR. And furthermore, it maintains an amount of open space that exceeds probably most of the properties in the neighborhood, just by the fact of all the constraints, all the setbacks. We have the stream setback, front, side, driveway, easement. So we're just asking for this nudging of this rear setback, and if it weren't for the triangular lot and the, imposition that the 20-foot setback from top of bank causes, we probably wouldn't necessarily need it. But anyway, this lot is the exception, and I think what we're providing fits beautifully. It provides materials, roof forms, a beautiful upper entry porch has a nice character. It pulls from the City of Albany design guidelines. So I think what we have would be a great addition, to the neighborhood. And again, we're very sensitive to privacy, and we want want to work with everyone and make something that works. And what we were talking about, what I'd like to make sure we include is, hard recommendation or condition of approval that we, under no circumstances, we make extra effort to preserve the rear landscaping as well as all the other existing trees which we like to keep for screening. So that's pretty much all I can say.
Thank you.
Okay.
Long.
I have some.
Did you have a question for the architect? Okay.
Yes. You are the architect?
Yes, sir.
Not the homeowner. Okay. I was looking at your roof plan, and I guess I really don't quite understand the separate volume above the other roofs.
I know what you're going to
And
ask.
I'm looking at a lot of different roof lines, a lot of different roof types, gables, hip roofs, shed roofs. And I would just like to understand what you're trying to do there. There's no building section here. I wish you had done a building section, because that would have helped me see what you're trying to do with that space above. And I don't see any relationship to the rooms below it. So I'm kind of curious about what that roof volume is doing and what, what's going on. It kind of makes a big jumble for me, is what I'm looking at in terms of roof lines, roof types.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
explain that to me,
sure.
please.
I'd be happy to. So, we're locked into this crazy diagonal. I hate diagonals. They make for really odd-shaped roof forms. So the reason why I want to add a slight change of additional roof form is to kind of tie it all together without having this weird diagonal, hip roof going up, and it also helps to frame and create an entry element. So it wraps around, and it also creates an aligning feature for the master bedroom and the little upper roof terrace. And I will add too, and as a reminder, that we haven't exceeded our maximum height. So so the reason why we add, so just again to back up or underscore it, diagonal lines do not make good overall roof forms. They become, it's really hard to do a sloped roof that's on a diagonal. It would be easier to do as a flat roof, as a shallow roof. So here we have you can probably see it better in the elevation, folded elevations. Or the 3D, the exterior view, probably easier to see. It looks better in the exterior view.
Another question, is that upper, if you look at the left side elevation, is that part of that upper roof form, roof
Oh yeah, that's
wider area? Is that within the 20-foot setback?
yes. So that upper roof is over the master closet. And then there's partially over a little kind of a study area in the master bedroom. So we have a slightly higher ceiling in the master bedroom to create a really nice space. And then it wraps around to kind of unify the whole building and create a gable that's centered over the front entry door and gives you that feeling of arrival.
And that's not meant to be a loft space or anything?
No. It just makes something interesting that otherwise could be very boring. And we have front entry porch, and I think it's intriguing. It could be boring. I just like people to go into a house and feel excited.
Okay, I have no other questions.
Yeah. Thomas,
Mr. Kent?
so the, I like the landscape plan, but you said it doesn't show all the existing trees. And maybe some of them are over the other side of the property line, but for instance, between one of the neighbors, 1195 Santa Fe, the aerial map, and I couldn't see it from the street, shows a fairly significant screening tree between the two properties, but it's not on your plan. Is that on the neighbor's property?
It may be, and, you know, if we wanted to add another condition, we could have an arborist do a tree survey.
Well, and, I'm not sure if adding a tree there is going to help one where, I don't, your building doesn't really impose, you don't look down on the neighbor's lot that much. And putting a tree there might just screen their yard more than they want to. So I don't know if adding, I guess I'm jumping around, adding a tree is a result, but it's, I think it was brought up the last point that the neighbor was feeling like they were being, that their privacy was being lost. And looking at the aerial photograph, it looks like that's not an issue with the tree, but looking at your plan, I can't tell. So I just hope, that's all, just wondering if you could spread some light on
Yeah, I didn't do an exhaustive tree survey, but you are correct. There are more trees that are right along the back property line than that I clarified or characterized. Again, and also along you could note too that along the creek and along the edge, there's a lot of trees. It would be very time intensive to go and catalog and survey where all of them are. But you really wouldn't actually, from Curtis Street, your view of this residence will be largely screened in the same way.
Right. Okay, thanks.
There would be the beautiful thing about this, this project is that it'll be interesting as you walk down Curtis. Your view of the project will be framed by the existing canopies there, and I think it'll be very, very attractive.
McLeod?
Another question. Are there utilities running to the lot already, or is it unimproved? Gas, water, sewer?
It doesn't have already. It doesn't have. There wasn't a building. There was a swimming pool there at one time, so it doesn't have the power riser, which I guess we'll do underground since we have the opportunity.
I guess I'd like to take the opportunity to encourage you to go all electric in your new house. The City of Albany is considering, it's under consideration now, not allowing new natural gas hookups to new construction. And I think it'd be a good idea for you to get ahead of the game and go all electric, and the savings on running the gas pipe from the street, new meter, gas piping, pretty much pays for your electrical equipment.
Yeah.
So I'd really like to encourage you to go all electric. And the heat pump technology is there for water heating and space heating. You can run a heat pump with an air handler, just like a forced air furnace, gets the same effect, and cooling. So the equipment's all easily available and easily installed, and so I'd really like to encourage that to reduce greenhouse gas production and help us reach our climate action plan goals.
It's fine by me. I agree. I'll encourage the owner if we want to put a condition there. I mean, I don't see the harm, and I certainly see the advantage.
Okay, thank you.
Berkeley's going that way, and we can throw some photovoltaics on the roof. I don't know if Albany has the photovoltaic power requirement.
I don't believe we have anything codified with going all electric. We could, and I don't think we can require that of the applicant, but we can encourage it with the project approval tonight.
Well, it is under consideration by the Climate Action Committee, and we're planning on following Berkeley's lead on that, and it may come up in the next code cycle. So it's something to take into consideration.
Might as well get ahead of the game.
Exactly, thank you.
Any other questions for the architect?
No.
Okay, great, thank you. With that, we'll turn it over to public comment. If there are any members of the public who'd like to speak, please fill out a speaker card and come on up and state your name, and you have 3 minutes to speak.
We received one speaker card.
Okay.
Katie Moreno, and Kathy. If there's anyone else who would like to speak on this project, please fill out a speaker card and hand it to me. Thanks.
Kathy Moreno, I'm the owner of 1195 Santa Fe, and I'm speaking also for my daughter, Cloud Chavez, who lives there, had childcare issues, couldn't make it, although she might still be trying to come. I didn't quite hear the exact questions that Mr. Kent was asking about the trees, but you know, we're concerned about the trees not just for the privacy, but also for the whole environment and habitat that surrounds the creek. From 1195, the south portion, maybe the south quarter, or you know, some percentage of it, there are no trees there, and we've been planning. We have planted trees there, but of course it would take decades for them to grow up to, well, the height of that building. But we're just asking that. I know that you've increased the or decreased the variance, decreased the setback, increase the setback, I guess, 2 feet more than what it was, and we're just requesting now that that the variance be conditioned on the owners not cutting those trees. We're just concerned that 1 or 2 or 3 years down the road, they'll just decide to, I don't know, cut them down. So that's our request. Thank you.
Do we have any other speakers on this item? Okay, seeing none, public comment is closed, and we'll turn it back to the commission for discussion. Any initial thoughts? Commissioner Donaldson?
Sure, I can start. So this is the second time I've had a chance to look at this, and I think, well, so it's a very unusual and challenging lot, and I now think that it's a good, well-done project for this lot. We talked a lot about the 20-foot setback last time and pulling back from the 12-foot rear yard or side yard, if whatever you call it. And it's gone to 14 feet. I think if we had the applicant go any farther, then we really would have compromised the livability of the interior spaces. So we're looking now with this modification at a 2,100 and some square foot home, which is not overly large, and I think they've done a nice job with the design. So I'm fine with the project as it's been revised. Questions about the trees, I think in part that's going to depend on the good faith of the owners over time, but we have every indication that the existing trees will be preserved, and they do provide a nice screen along the rear yards of the adjoining neighbors. I know from site visits that the trees and vegetation along the creek is not all mapped and shown on the plan, and that in fact the vegetation along the creek is quite dense and adds to the cover of the site. And I believe that the applicant will want to keep that, and that they will they'll have every incentive to live in a greened and tree-full kind of environment there. At this point, with the revisions they've made, I do not have any problems with the project, and I support it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll speak.
Kent?
Sure. Just a few comments. I agree. I think it's a well-designed project. The screening of there's enough screening there to soften the effect of the two houses kind of close together. And it's no different than any other neighborhood where you have houses fairly close. In this case, we're talking, if the neighbor is 20 feet from their backyard and this applicant is 14 feet, you're talking 34-foot difference between the homes. It's pretty good for Albany. There is a lot, as the applicant stated, there's a lot of open space that they're not developing on. So really, they're providing more open space. Half of their lot there's no building on at all. So it's quite open for Albany standards for a lot. They did a moderate pass at a creek-sensitive landscape plan. I think I like the blue elderberries, great idea. The rest of it's okay. And I think, but more importantly, the building really faces the creek and the street, and so the rear of it and the north side of it really aren't interfering with the privacy of the neighbors. There's windows in the stairwells or high windows in the bathroom, but nothing really that imposes down on the neighbors. So I think it's a sensibly designed project. And I'll support it. I don't think it will impact the neighbors as much as they may be thinking. I do want to address one letter that came from 1198 Curtis Street, where the neighbor was mentioning that they have to adhere to a 30-foot setback from their creek. But I believe the creek in their yard is in the rear of their yard, side and rear, whereas this one's on the side, so it's a little different. It's not a rear setback issue. That's all I have to say.
Do you have anything to add, Commissioner McLeod?
Yeah. It is, I agree with previous comments. It is not in a really large house in terms of square footage, certainly given the lot size. And I'm comfortable trading off a little bit of, side yard for rear yard in the sense of granting the variance. There's plenty of open space on this lot. It's, should be a very nice park-like setting in a way. I think it's a very nice place to live. Having mentioned the roof lines earlier, I really am not a fan of this raised roof portion. I just don't really see it adding much to this design except making it look kind of jumbled and truncated at points and a funny mix of roof lines. Granted, it is a difficult assignment to integrate that angled portion, but at the same time, I think this would look better if the roof was reduced and just sort of one upper roof. Doing these clear story monitor roofs really are better when they're better integrated into the section of the building. I don't really see how it relates to the lower rooms at all. In fact, it just doesn't, as I can tell. And they are much better when they're, filled with windows and bring in lots of light, but they don't have to be so big and long to do that. I would feel more comfortable if this upper roof was lowered. And I don't particularly like it being in the setback, in the 20-foot setback area. It sort of adds to the height and bulk of the project on that side. Whereas if you're gaining something from getting variance, I think you should be sensitive to that and keep the roof a little lower in that area. And my other comment is that I see the windows just kind of all over the place in terms of size, configuration. I think more consistency in the windows would help a lot. And the right side elevation, I find that to be kind of blank in a way, and not a good way, even though I can understand you're trying to, it's for privacy concerns, but at the same time, I find it just not a very attractive facade, and it could benefit from a little more, either some more windows or some other features that would make it not look so blank. It just seems like a big flat wall to me. 4 windows. Those are my comments.
Okay. So I'll just chime in. I do sort of share a mix of what my fellow commissioners have mentioned. I'm of 2 different minds of the sort of the monitor sort of taller roof form, especially at the rear, within the rear setback. I completely agree with Commissioner McLeod on the component of where it's in the setback. You know, when you encroach into a setback, being very sort of prudent with how you're asking for that exception and that space, and the fact that the space isn't necessarily giving additional square footage or habitable space. It really is just allowing for really, really tall ceilings, which is, you know, lovely, and I understand sort of the desire for that, but sort of balancing that with being in the rear yard is something that definitely I was weighing looking at this. Sort of on the flip side, I do very much recognize that this is a very, very constrained site. And, you know, at a certain point, there needs to also be the ability to develop a sort of a livable enough home that makes it worthwhile, sort of high construction costs, to also buy the land and build the house and be able to make this sort of a project that pencils, and sort of also nodding to the fact that there is so much of this site that can't otherwise be developed, and there's a lot of other undeveloped part of the property. So anyhow, those were some of the sort of the struggles that I was having. But I would say where I've landed on this is, you know, as it relates to the neighbors to the rear concerned about privacy, I have a couple suggestions and then a couple thoughts on this. One, I do very much think we should maybe incorporate an additional condition. I would look to Commissioner Kent maybe on this a little bit, but in terms of some sort of tree protection plan. I know there's some conditions about retaining existing natural sort of local species back there, but I don't know if appropriate, maybe to add a condition of approval that where the trees are in good shape, that there actually is tree protection plans. My one concern, and one of the changes I may ask for on this, is at the rear of the property within that setback, and I know it's sort of a permitted obstruction at some level, but there is a landing, sort of a French door access landing and stairs to get into that back space. And I don't really anticipate that anyone's going to be using that rear 14 feet for sort of rear yard traditional purposes. I think more likely the outdoor space is going to be on the creek side. And so as sort of a nod to the neighbors who are concerned about privacy, as well as a nod to sort of extra assurance that those trees are going to be protected, you know, building even a 4-foot tall landing still requires digging into the dirt and sort of disruption back there, and you're starting to get closer and closer to those trees. So I would be of the mind to say as a condition that, you know, that becomes a window rather than a door, and that landing goes away, and that really does become the back of the building. Helps with privacy. I think it's a pretty small change as sort of a nod and a respect to the neighbors' privacy concerns. So that would be one of the changes that I would ask for, but, and going back to my notes up here, but otherwise, you know, the property is as a whole below the FAR threshold that requires and mandates exceptional design, but I do feel like, you know, again, the roof form's struggling with a little bit, but it is a sort of a funky site. Overall, I do feel like there's at least high quality materials being used on this project. And definitely, I would say meeting an equivalent standard of exceptional design that we've seen on other projects that have had that actual code standard to meet. And I like the fact, you know, the siting on this, I think we also have to balance by the way that this is also being cited. It does, I think it does improve the light access to the directly adjacent neighbor on Curtis. None of their side-facing windows are blocked by this building at all, so there is some benefit to the adjacent neighbor where the siting ended up being. So all in all, those would be my general comments on this. If others have.
Well, I will push back a little bit on the removal of the deck, 'cause I think it is a nice feature for the living room and kitchen, but maybe it doesn't need to be that long, but he is providing a screening of myrtles, and it's a constrained lot, so I wouldn't want to give up on the use of that.
No, I wasn't talking about the deck to the side. Did you get that? I was talking more about the deck and directly at the rear.
Right, yeah.
Is that the same one you were talking
That's what I'm talking about, right. So it might be a little deeper than you need, you're right. It maybe could be pulled back. Yeah, but a little bit, step out there, have a cup of coffee, would be quite nice.
There is still, I mean, there's a lot of.
It's 3 feet high. The myrtles would be about 6 to 10 feet if they grow well. So another thing that confused me, this is all in a storm drain easement, and I'm not sure what goes with that easement.
We don't know.
I know, they come through and clear out all the
We don't
vegetation.
have a
everything.
title report, and we don't know if there's even any pipes in that storm drain or easement.
Right, it might just be empty.
I mean, looking at at least Google aerial, it does look like there's mature trees that are inbound of 5 feet, certainly. And so when looking at the site plan inbound of that, you're starting to get to where they're putting that little deck off of the side
Right.
property. And I am concerned that by installing that little deck, and again, that's not the only deck in usable space in the property. I would think you'd be more inclined to probably go sit
Yeah,
and
you
look at the
would.
creek
You would.
rather
You would
than
sit up under the creek, right.
in the back. And so it seems like a pretty modest thing and sort of, I think it,
Well, how about we just request they pull it back? Like, right now, it's, about 8 feet. So they pull it back to 4 feet or so they at least have access out there.
or maybe as a compromise, I mean, do you feel that a tree protection plan
I think that's a great idea.
would be, so maybe what it is based on the outcome of the tree protection plan, if in order to protect the trees, that needs to go, then that can be removed from the project. But if after the tree protection plan, that deck can coexist with the trees, because then we can get specifics of exactly how far from the property line the trees are, and I think we don't have a solid sense of where exactly they are relative to some of those features.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. And that brings up the other issue. We're putting those myrtle symbols all along the tree, but I don't know how well they'll really survive there under those trees planted on the existing roots. Yeah, so that's another whole issue. So part of the tree protection plan would include whether or not it's feasible to plant those myrtles there. You're going to cut through 6-inch roots and plant a myrtle tree doesn't make sense. I don't know what's in that ground, but okay. So tree protection plan, and then reduce the deck, and also
If the tree protection plan
warrants it.
warrants the removal of it in order to preserve the existing trees, then the rear deck and landing
Yeah.
go away. If you don't need to cut into them to preserve the trees, then they can keep that feature.
Okay, tree protection plan would rule, and then
And to me, at least, and part of this, sort of for the public's knowledge, to me, part of this is as the justification for the variance, there are property hardship findings that have to be made, and some of those property hardship findings are also about, basically not adversely affecting the surrounding neighborhood. And so to me, the preservation of those trees as a buffer is a really important part of granting this variance. And so I think that's, to me, the ultimate goal, is making sure those really robust, mature trees that really can't be replaced right away if they were to
if
die.
we weren't doing the variance for the setback, this wouldn't be an issue, but,
Correct. It's because of the setback component that, to me, is driving this.
okay. Okay.
Was there any other?
You have enough there to make a motion then?
Well, yeah, I'll make a motion that we accept the applicant's plan with the caveat that they produce a tree protection plan done by a certified consulting arborist that makes sure that the deck and planting will not harm the existing trees. Existing trees, will not harm the existing trees, yeah.
All right, I think I understand. I'll second it.
Okay. We'll take a roll call vote then. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Seeing none, that motion has passed. That project has been approved. And please note to leave the story poles up through the appeal period, 14-day appeal period. Great. That moves us on to the next item. As I open my agenda, one more, sorry here. All right, that brings us on to item 6-2. This is planning application 18-037, design review and density bonus application at the northwest corner of Portland and Kains, also known as 634 Kains.
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that I should recuse myself from this item. Staff has told me, and I had missed it in the past, that a property that I own, my wife and I own, a duplex we own, it's in Cornell, is within the 500-foot radius where I need to recuse myself on this project. I will do so with some reluctance, I have to say, because according to Google Maps, the closest corner of the property that I own is 498 feet from the closest corner of this site. So if we measured it from the center lines from the centers of the two parcels, I would not have to recuse myself. I would be over 600 feet away. And this is the second time that I've been here that I've had to recuse myself on something that was 495. This is 498 feet away. And I think it is a disadvantage to the commission to lose a voter, to lose a participant on what I think is kind of an arbitrary rule. I know it's required by the Fair Political Practice Commission. I hadn't even thought of the fact that our apartment, our duplex, was within the 500-foot range of this project until, I guess, someone on staff checked and said, hey, you can't do that, participate here. So it's with some reluctance that I will step aside and step down and leave for tonight. And I wish we could do a more liberal interpretation of that rule so we could have more commissioners on some of these items that are really a close call. There must be another way. I don't know what the rules are. Is it, corner to corner, center to center? But there must be some interpretation there, and I'd really like it to see if we could draw that circle of conflict, which is really an arbitrary thing, much narrower. So with that, I have to leave.
Yeah, I'm sorry you have to leave. I looked at the map, the concentric or the circle map, and it looked like it barely touched the sidewalk of that corner and not the property. But I don't know where
Google Maps
how
is pretty
accurate that map was that we
And
use.
Like four square feet of this parcel is within 500 feet of my corner. It's unfortunate, I think. So,
Well, we have to defer to staff. So, right? I mean,
We need to take a vote on recusal or not? We don't take a vote on recusal, right?
No.
Okay.
It's state law. I think Commissioner Donaldson is doing the right thing. I think it is, state law is intended to be a minimum standard. And, through the ethical training that we go through, we err on the side of being very careful about this. And I do think it's unfortunate to lose Commissioner Donaldson's experience and wisdom in this, but it does set an example that the commission acts in an ethical manner, and for that, I think it's important for you to do that, for all of us to do that. And my understanding is it's from corner to corner. So it's a regulation, it's a state law. It is subjects commissioners individually to substantial fines, and those fines happen regularly. And not necessarily in Albany, but in a lot of municipalities. So I think in this case, I think it's the right thing to do.
All right. With that, we will turn it over for a staff presentation.
Hey. Good evening, Chair Waddy and members of the Commission. I'm Jean Iceberg, the contract planner for this item, 634 Kains Avenue. So, can you see the board okay? Is it possible to lower the lights maybe right there? Thank you. Okay, so we met just over a year ago on this project. There were some changes in the project team, so it took a little while to come back. We do have the same architect and the same property owner, so you'll see a lot of things that look very similar. So just orienting you to the site location, looking north, this is San Pablo, this is Portland, and this is Kains, and this is our L-shaped site. There's a restaurant on the western side of the parcel, and the part that we're going to be looking at is this eastern portion of the site here along Kains and Portland. So an overview of the project, the proposal is for 9 attached townhouses. The proposal is proposed under state density bonus law, providing 1 below market rate unit. It also includes frontage improvements to the sidewalk, landscaping, replacement of the street trees, and a reconfigured restaurant parking area. Additionally, the proposal includes a lot line adjustment. It's not part of the request tonight, but is a ministerial approval that would be a condition of the project's approval. So as I mentioned, we were here last summer, and at that time, the applicant, we had a study session exploring 2 alternatives. So On the top row here, this was an 8-townhome alternative. You can see there are no entry stoops here. It's just flush to the street, and that's because that's 100% consistent with the city's code where you can't encroach onto the side setback. And then we had an option for a 9-townhome unit project that through state density bonus law and the waivers and concessions added an additional unit and also allowed those stoops to encroach into that side setback. So the feedback that we got from the commission at that time, summarized in the staff report and here, the commission expressed a preference for the lower plan there, the front stoops and the 9-unit version of the plan, and that's what the applicant has proposed at this time. There was another request for more variation between the townhome units, and the applicant came back with the following. So as you'll see in the next diagrams, they alternated the location of the upper story deck, so it flip-flops with each unit, creating some variation and some recesses in the facade and the roof lines. They alternated some of the colors and changed the railings of the stairs on the front stoops to make them a little more permeable. And then lastly, the commission had some concerns about the split zoning that would result from the lot line adjustment, and I'll go into that in a little more detail again. But the applicant has provided a diagram illustrating how the remainder of that site, so the restaurant and retained parking part of the site, could redevelop in the future as a flag lot configuration. Okay, so the request is design review approval, the approval of the state density bonus law application, and then the lot line adjustment that I mentioned, again, as a condition of approval. So typically, the Planning Commission would be the final review body, design review for this type of project, but because it's a state density bonus project, the city code says that the city council is the approving body. And so if you want to take action tonight, that would be a recommendation to the city council to take action. So the site plan, you can see down here is Kains. This is Portland, and the access is on Kains with individual entrances to each townhome. There's ground level open space at the rear, and then the 2 side townhomes have a little extra space on each end. There are shared driveways for the most part, and so you'll see these curb cuts that access 2 garages typically, except for the one on plan left. There are removal of approximately 3 on-street parking spaces by adding these curb cuts. The unit plans, I just wanted to call your attention to one item. We did get an email from Commissioner McLeod about the bike parking. It's a little hard to see here, but the architect did go ahead and show where, how that bike parking could be integrated, and this is kind of an example here. Conceivably the bike parking could be mounted on the wall here, but just to show you how that fits in. In terms of the architectural design, these are contemporary townhomes with open gable roofs. The facades have a variety of window sizes, the front stoops at the ground level, as I mentioned. And then here you can see that upper deck alternating. So last year when we saw this, we had all of the upper decks on the other side, I believe, on the west side, and now we've got them going east-west, east-west, which creates a little more variation in that facade. This is integral stucco in 3 alternating white and gray tones. Solid wood front doors with frosted glazing, aluminum windows, wood stairs at the front stoops, shingle roofing, and then you can see this wood siding in the top element at the open space, the open roof deck. And then wood fencing along the perimeter. The landscape design is still conceptual. It lists a plant list of low water use plants, and staff has included a draft condition of approval to provide a more detailed landscape plan subject to staff and Planning Commission representatives' review and approval prior to building permit issuance. And so at that time, we'd be looking for the exact number of plants, size of trees, et cetera. I mentioned the project proposes to remove 5 street trees and 3 on-site trees. Street trees would be replaced with 8 trees on Kains and Portland Avenues, and this removal request will go before the Parks and Rec Open Space Commission so that they can prepare a recommendation to the City Council as part of the project review. So the proposal under state density bonus law, this includes one below market rate unit for low-income households. This is also how the project is meeting the city's inclusionary requirement. In this case, no actual density bonus is requested. They're not requesting additional units over and above what the density is allowed on this site, only flexibility in the development standards. So this includes, one, the waivers to reduce the front setback and the rear setback, two, a waiver to reduce the daylight plane, the height limit requirement on Portland Avenue from 15 feet to 10 feet, and then lastly, a concession to allow the front stoops to encroach into the side setback. So the project is consistent with the zoning ordinance and the general plan land use designations. The attachment to the staff report, attachment 1, includes a more detailed analysis. But the entire project site, including the restaurant parcel, is identified as a housing element opportunity site. So the entire site has a realistic capacity of 18 units for a 25,000 square foot site. So the development of the 9 units on the 10,000 square foot portion is consistent with the housing element assumptions. So I mentioned the parcel figuration on the left. This is the existing parcels, these 4 parcels. The proposal is to do a lot line adjustment to end up with 2 parcels. So the parcel on our right to the east is the development proposal, and then the resulting parcel is this flag-shaped lot. So the issue here that the commission expressed concerns about last time is you have the SPC zoning designation on the left, and then this piece of R3 on the right. And so the city's code does allow for this kind of dual designation, but there were just concerns about how this could actually build out in the future. And I do want to mention this is legally conforming lots. It's just that the zoning is a little awkward. So this is an example of how it could build out in the future. And this proposal is contingent on the continuation of this shared parking easement that the site currently shares with the adjacent property owner. So in this case, you could enter here or a driveway from Portland, so either San Pablo or Portland. This is the existing curb cut. And this is our townhome proposal down here. And this is an example of a ground floor parking, retail, lobby, and then upper floors of residential. So this is actually proposing, or excuse me, it's not proposing, it's a concept for 32 one-bedroom units, 2,800 square foot corner retail space, and a combination of structured lift and surface parking. Just some notable conditions of approval. I mentioned the lot line adjustment. This does have a sort of a temporary address. They would have to do an address assignment. An affordable housing agreement, this would be approved by the city council to guarantee that the 1 unit would be affordable to low-income households. Utility line vacation, we're requiring documentation from PG&E that there's a subsurface high voltage line under the site, so we'd require that to be vacated prior to start of demolition. The project is subject to the Art and Public Places Fund, either through artwork or funds in lieu. And then lastly, the detailed landscape plan that I mentioned. Oops. Okay. We did receive a number of public comments over the last couple days, and I just wanted to summarize those. A couple of the comments related to the covered bike parking requirement. The project does satisfy the covered parking requirement for bikes, but there was a recommendation to add additional bike parking in a common room. A couple letters of support, but some recommendations around unbundling parking from the housing in case somebody didn't want the parking, and also a desire to see more density on the site, and some concerns about the loss of parking on the restaurant parcel as that restaurant parking lot would be reconfigured. And then lastly, concerns about the density bonus waivers and the concerns about compliance with the zoning code in terms of how yards are defined and the reductions in the height limit, daylight plane, and projections into the side setbacks, those stoops. Staff's recommendation is, again, this is an advisory recommendation, but staff's recommending, so first, again, this is the commission's review of the project is advisory. We will be going to council for the final action, and I mentioned that the street tree removal request is going to go to the Parks and Rec Commission. So staff's recommendation is that you review the projects, the draft conditions of approval, and approve the resolution making findings and recommending that the City Council approve the project. Okay, that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. We also have the applicant team here.
Couple questions. The affordable housing agreement, how does that work?
Well, maybe Jeff can help me, because I don't think we've done one in a little while, but
We haven't done we did one last for the project at 727 San Pablo, which was 11, 12 years ago, I guess. It's a written contract between the property owner and the city that's recorded against the property that requires, sets up a requirement for income eligibility for the tenant in the designated unit.
Okay, and they check up on that every
We
year?
from time to time check on it. This would be a rental unit, so it's we'd probably check on it. We'd have the property owner do an income check probably once a year or something. Oh, excuse me, it's for sale. Okay. So we would have one way or the other. We would do from periodically check the income of the occupants.
The other thing is, explain, why does this go to council after, if we approve it, it goes to council for?
the way that the density bonus ordinance in the city
density
code
bonus.
is written, state density bonus projects are approved by the city council.
Okay.
Additionally, the city council does approve the affordable housing agreement. So this would have, just as the BMR unit would have gone to the council, and so we're packaging everything to be approved by that body.
Any other questions? I did have just one question, partially for sort of the public's knowledge as well, but just on the state density bonus law, if you could just clarify on 2 points, or maybe 3 points, for the waivers, for example, what level of discretion does the staff have in critiquing the requested waivers to accommodate density in this case, or the density in the BMR unit?
So the waivers, and here those are for the front and rear setbacks and the daylight plane height requirement, height limit. And so there, the waivers are permitted if they would physically preclude the construction of the BMR unit. And so in this case, that ninth unit, that BMR unit, could not be constructed, but for the change in the reduction of the setback and the reduction in the daylight plane. There's a different burden for the concessions, and those need to demonstrate that there's essentially a cost reduction in providing that concession. And so they've demonstrated that. There is a illustration in the plan set on sheet A0.3. It demonstrates how the project, if they were built flush, like I showed in that earlier slide where you didn't have those stoops, they would need to cantilever over the second story, which would result in higher construction costs. And in addition to the cantilevering, it also would reduce the dimension of the bedroom, which would not be consistent with the building code. So we thought that they successfully demonstrated that cost efficiency And that's something where the city has a little bit more discretion. The waivers, we really don't. If it's going to physically preclude that below market rate unit, then that's standard.
And then sort of follow-up question to that, does the way the city's density bonus ordinance is written, does the council have the discretion to still disapprove the project as a whole, or are they obligated to approve the project under state density bonus law if they feel like the waivers and the concession and incentives have been adequately met?
They would, trying to think how they could disapprove the project. I mean, the project is also subject to the Housing Accountability Act. It meets all of the zoning standards and requirements, inclusive of the waivers and concessions. The concession is really the only thing, and we believe that the project has met that threshold.
Great. I just wanted sort of everyone to understand, so state density bonus law and Housing Accountability Act together make for a package that a lot of discretion is removed when utilizing those two state programs in tandem. Okay, great. I didn't have any other questions for staff. Did you, Commissioner McLeod?
Yeah, just kind of a follow-up. Yeah, my understanding of the state density bonus law is that we are more or less compelled to grant the concession or allow it. And similar with waivers, that we have to have really compelling reasons not to approve them in terms of detriment to the public good, things like that. There were some letters about the parking and in regards to the restaurant. I was just wondering about, I was reading that we're not really allowed to share parking between different uses, so I was wondering how the parking was counted for the restaurant and if that is really a big part of what is approved with this project. It seemed like the Taco Bell has a certain number of required spaces, correct? And the other restaurant would have a certain number of required spaces and that they're not allowed to overlap, at least by our planning code law. So I was just wondering about that. I mean, that was brought up in one of the letters we received. So I'm just curious how the parking for the restaurant affects this project's approval. I mean, is that necessary that that restaurant meets its parking requirements for this project to be approved in front of us? Or are these separable or are they inseparable?
No, so we wanted to make sure that the parking requirements for the continuation of the restaurant use are still met. And right now, the restaurant has more parking. Its existing parking lot exceeds the number of spaces that are required for such a use. So they're required to have 23 spaces, and they're providing that between the spaces on the site and the shared parking with the adjacent property owner.
Are we allowed, I read that we're not allowed to share parking spaces between uses without certain special approvals, or?
Maybe I should be clear, it is a shared driveway. I
mean, are you counting the, if you go to the parking lot, are you counting the spaces on the Taco Bell side as part of the, I'm just trying to figure this out. I mean,
yeah, no, it's a good
don't really like
see
parking
if I
driving
have a
these kind of
good
projects, no pun intended.
graphic of it. I might need to switch to, let's see if I save no, this isn't going to show it.
That's the future.
That's the future one.
One set.
What's the plan?
Well, that's coming up. It's my recollection that
Sheet A 1.2.
Taco Bell and the restaurant properties have an existing agreement, and my understanding is this doesn't change that existing agreement.
All right. I had one other question. Just, is there a diagram of the daylight plane request? Where, did anybody draw a diagram of that, how it's, I don't all see it, but I just want to kind of get an idea of its impact.
Sure. Okay. So this is a little hard to see, but wait, let's put one more.
Yeah.
So with respect to your first question, so this is it's a little hard to see right now, but these are 16 spaces.
Solely dedicated to the current restaurant.
That's right. And then we're adding these 15 spaces, which is how we got to 31. And those are shared between these two sites. This restaurant only needs 23 parking spaces based on its size. I don't have the square footage of the Taco Bell site.
Okay. We can look at that later.
We do know we have this agreement about the shared parking and easement between the two.
And to answer your question about the daylight plane, sheet
Okay.
A4.1 has a diagram that provides a dashed outline of what the daylight plane looks like.
And then one last question. The street parking on Kains, those spaces are long enough for standard vehicles between the curb cuts. So those are,
Okay, so, sorry, I'm a little behind you. So this was A4.1, which you pointed out, which is showing the daylight plane.
Daylight.
And that changed. So the curb cuts, they are,
it seems like we have enough
I don't have a
street.
measurement, I might put the architect on the spot, because I don't have a
There are
measurement.
decent street parking spaces in
Looks-
front.
30 feet between the stoops. And about maybe 18 feet
Okay, that looks fine.
between the driveways,
Okay,
which would fit a vehicle.
standard vehicle. Okay, great.
Let me double check.
So one last question. Are we gaining parking spaces on Portland because we're eliminating a curb cut there or anything like that? Or that's all fenced
Well, we still have a curb cut to enter the restaurant parking lot. Oh, no, you're right. Could be gaining one parking spot because we are eliminating one
One
curb cut on
yeah.
Portland, yes.
So there's a net gain of one.
So depending how that,
Might even result in more just due to where the placement is.
Maybe, yeah.
Great. Any other questions for staff? Okay, great. Then with that, we'll turn it over to the project sponsor for a brief presentation.
Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Lisa Vilhauer with Branda Development. First, want to thank staff for presentation, staff report, and for all the work. Have been just excellent and been great to work with. I wanted to take a minute and briefly introduce us, as you did see this project a year ago with a different developer. We, I guess, would say lucked out in the fact that they dropped out. We did take over on this project. It is a joint venture with LRG Investments and Branda Development. A little history about Branda Development. We've been in the Bay Area for over 100 years, building and developing. Right now we have a 32-unit townhome or condominium project being built in El Cerrito. We just finished a 47-unit apartment building in Oakland, and we have another 83-unit one under construction. We range from high-end custom homes all the way up to the high-density rentals. LRG Investors, you'll know as the team behind the Sprout Center, the Village, University Village. They also did the Sprout Center in Oakland. So before I turn it over to our team and David Trachtenberg, I just wanted to briefly touch on a couple of those parking items. We are adding one parking spot on Portland because there's two curb cuts, so one will go away, we'll add a spot. In terms of the parking agreement, it is our understanding that that agreement is in place and it is working. We're not a party to that agreement, so we don't have any other information on that at this time. So I will turn it over to David Trachtenberg. Before I do, I also have Stefan Schnitzler, who's our in-house counsel and our density bonus guru. So if you have any additional questions on that, you can answer those. So
Good evening. I'm David Trachtenberg, one of the architects for the project. And I'd just like to start by thanking Jean, who's done a really outstanding job as our planner, and also acknowledge my collaborators, Isaiah Stackhouse and Eric Tam, as well as our client, and also Mr. Lee, who's been a great client also. So I'd say that Jean did an outstanding job explaining the project. I'm not going to walk you through this whole thing again. I think you guys are quite capable of reading plans, so I'm just here to answer questions that you might have. That's it for me.
Are there any questions, commissioners, for the architect?
Yeah, I guess just for starters, kind of your marketing idea is families, right?
Yes.
Right, so it's 3 bedrooms. We've gotten a number of letters about bike parking. We are in an era when we are really trying to push transit-oriented development.
Right.
And I was wondering what your thoughts are on that. So what I see when I see families around town, I see a parent on a cargo bike with a kid in the back, another kid, 7-year-old or 8-year-old next to that cyclist, and then the other parent on another bike. So if you're marketing to families, where are they putting those bikes?
Well, I mean, those families can make the choice not to have a car and have plenty of space in the garage for those bikes. You know, I saw your letter about the cargo bikes. And I think there's ways.
That wasn't my letter.
Oh, no, it's not your letter. Okay. Someone's letter about the cargo bikes. I mean, I think that is a reality. I think, you know, one could build a little shed in the backyard for them, hang them on the exterior wall, you know, hang them up higher in the ceiling. You know, I don't know. There's only we are required to provide the one parking space on site, so there's only so much space. I mean, I suppose one could take that back bedroom and turn that into, you know, sort of playroom / bike storage room if one wanted to, if that was a priority. But that's really up for, I think, the individual owners.
Cargo bikes weigh like 60, 70, 60 pounds. So
Yeah.
they're pretty bulky. So no one's going to carry them upstairs or
No,
through the
absolutely
house or
not,
anything
yeah.
like that. And then the backyards, do they have access
Yeah.
from the
Well, you can get through them through the garage, and then you can
through the
access
garage
them.
and through the bedroom?
Yeah.
So if I was to take my cargo bike, I'd have to roll it through the house and out the back door and lock it up in the backyard.
I think that would be the case, unless you had, for example, Unit 9, there would be a place in the side yard to park it. But other than that, I don't think there's a great place other than the ground floor.
I also would like to understand where the gable roofs came from, because this is the first time I've seen this project. It was not on the commission a year ago, so
Where the gable roofs came from?
as a design element.
Sure.
Because when I look at the surrounding area, I really don't see, yeah, when I look at the surrounding area, I don't really see anything like that. I don't really see it
Right.
as contextual.
We don't see a lot of row houses either.
And I,
But I would
to
say.
be honest, if you let me just, so I'm sorry. I really prefer flat roofs for this kind of project, and I know that's the kind of work you've done before. So,
Right. I think the gable roofs came from the fact that we made a decision early on to place the principal living space on the top floor. And given the daylight plane, that allowed us to maximize the volume of that top floor by using a gable. If we had gone to a flat roof, those ceilings would be lower and I think less dramatic. And so we felt that the gable roof was a helpful feature in that respect, but also to give it some scale and sort of house-like quality in the neighborhood. There's a long tradition of, you know, Dutch row houses and European row houses that have kind of expression of individual buildings stacked one to the next, which we think is attractive.
I was also wondering how, what kind of mechanical systems, again, going back to kind of the all-electrical idea, how are you planning on providing your utilities? I mean, I would hope it would be going all electric. And in that case, you'd be saving, like I said earlier, a lot of money on 9 gas meters, 9 trenches, gas piping, flues. And the corollary to that is, where are you putting your compressors, it's much easier now to heat with variable refrigerant systems or even just a standard heat pump. Or in this case, if you used just standard, I'm sorry, I'm blanking out. But if you just use standard compressor line set systems to each room, you save a lot on ductwork. So there are a lot of great reasons to go all electric, and it will be part of our climate action plan. But then it's like, where are you putting your equipment? Because I see this really tiny mechanical room down there that will basically hardly fit a thing. So the advantage of flat roofs is you can put all that equipment on the roof. You can still put solar panels on the roof, and it all works.
Right. Well, Brenna, the developer and builder, agrees to do the all-electric. We'd like to keep equipment off the roof if we can. Obviously, at this point, we haven't got a mechanical design yet, but if it is going to all-electric, we'll just have to figure out where that goes. It's possible that we could carve out some space up on the top. I think we'd rather not. We'd like the volume that's there. It's also possible that you could park some units in the cricket, basically between those roofs, which would not be visible to anybody.
Okay. I guess, it's going back to the volume for the upper floor. If you didn't have the gable roof, you could also raise the volume of those ceilings, a flat ceiling by a foot or two, and still have a lower overall roof height, still have dramatic spaces. So I just would like to have you consider that. And that's all my questions for right now.
Okay.
Commissioner Kent, did you have any questions for the architect?
No questions.
All right, great, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we will then move to public comment. Speakers will have 3 minutes each. Please state your name for the record and fill out a speaker card. Chris, do we have any speaker cards yet?
Not yet, but I think we're going to get one right now.
Okay.
Ed Fields.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Ed Fields. I think you need to base your decisions on accurate information. You should question what you read in the staff report. For example, on page 10, where it shows surrounding property uses, in fact, to the south is single family, to the north is single family, to the east is single family and multifamily. Simple things like that. The 8-unit configuration that wouldn't need any waivers, that works if you consider the front of the property on Portland Avenue. Has the community development director determined which is the front of this property? I only asked that a year ago. Why do we care about county records about the size of the restaurant? We know the size of the restaurant, and the county records are outdated. The restaurant requires 29 spaces to remain in compliance with the number of spaces required by our code. And not 31 is the total number. Taco Bell has 8. I know more about the agreement than you guys seem to want to know about. But why do we care about parking? We should really be talking about housing, right? But we should have accurate information when we make our decisions. Has anyone asked about the conditional use permits that were placed on this property back when the Sizzler restaurant was built? I've only been asking about those for 2 or 3 years now. So we don't really have accurate information, but we do the best we can. So this proposes 8 2,000 square foot units. I live in a less than 900 square foot house, single family house on this block. They're really only providing the low income unit to get a density bonus, to get waivers, unless they're going to be for sale, right? Because if they were for rent, the Palmer decision, they wouldn't have to provide affordable housing. So I guess now we're hearing that they're for sale. You've read my letter, about the previous project, the 3 and 4 unit parcels. I hope you've read my letter because I don't want to go back over all that stuff. One of the important things is the setback on Kains Avenue, which is the front of the property. It has 8 of the 9 entrances. It has 9 garages. We've changed our zoning code. I showed you that in my letter. So we know where the front of the property is, except Jeff is supposed to say where it is. And I've not heard, so I know where I think it is. There should be a 15-foot setback at the front of the property with a daylight plane from 28 feet to 35 feet. There's no daylight plane on Kains Avenue. The setback has been reduced to 9 feet, and there is no daylight plane. Just 35-foot, whatever you call it, gable, bridge, I don't know. I call your attention to section 2024.070B2 of our code. I included that in the letter to you folks earlier today, so I assume you've all read it. I mean, I don't know what else I can say. I've been saying the same thing for years. This is a difficult decision because it's a less deep lot than we normally would have. It's a 67-foot deep lot. And that makes for difficult decisions to try to maintain the restaurant with its parking, which this actually does not do. Maybe we need, I mean, I don't think you can get a waiver according to density bonus law because that's another property, right? You can't waive their parking, the restaurant's parking. But I'm not saying you use that to deny the project. We need housing. Okay, we need affordable housing. We don't need 2,000 square foot units. And then they put up this phony proposal for, 27 one-bedroom units someday on the other piece of the property. How about some 1- and 2-bedroom units? How about some relatively affordable units, even if they don't officially count for density bonus? The waiver is based on physically precluding building at the density proposed. I put that in my letter. That's from state density bonus law. And it doesn't guarantee a unit size. I don't know if there's any case law on that or anything. It doesn't guarantee they can build the density that they want to build, but build 2,000 square foot units. Do you have any discretion on that? I don't know. Anyway, I got a few seconds left. My big picture comment. Right now, dense urban infill is the mantra. Just remember at the beginning of the 20th century, we herded workers into the inner cities. In the middle of the 20th century, we ushered them out to the suburbs. Now we're back to densifying the inner cities again. And that'll work for as long as we're able to supply them with food and water and get the waste out. And then where will we be?
M. Crowley.
I'm Maureen Crowley. I live on the 600 block of Kains. I'm resigned the city approving large-scale developments on the R3 residential streets adjacent to San Pablo commercial. I'm at the point of not caring you build these townhouses because you'll do so no matter what. However, I wish for once, just for once, you'd be honest with your documentation. The frontage is clearly on Kains, not Portland. The so-called ADA unit at the end with the Portland entrance, let's be honest, it's not ADA. It's just an excuse to justify frontage on Portland. That's the only reason you put it in. That ADA unit is not going to lug their bicycles up 3 flights of stairs. It's ridiculous. Absolutely, it's not an ADA unit. It's not designed as an ADA unit. It's an excuse to pretend that Portland is the main entry, even though the address currently is a Kains address. All 9 driveways enter from Kains, all of them. Kains is the front. So you should not be able to get away with 9-foot setbacks. The front yard setback should be 15 feet. The east, the front reduction waiver from 9 to 15 will preclude off-street parking. You still keep implying Kains is a side yard. You don't need these agreements, these, I forget the word, you don't need those, Portland and the house to the north of there. You don't need those because if you were honest and said Kains is the front, you wouldn't need these waivers. It's a null and void. The plan shows individual garage entrances with shared driveways at the curb cuts. And there are 3, I estimated 15 feet spaces that you could park there, maybe 1 around the corner in Portland apparently. We've lost 8 spaces in this development, but pretend 8 of these people renting or probably purchasing these places will actually faithfully park their cars in the garage every single night. That being said, there's still a minimum of 25 extra cars on our street. And by evening, that street is already completely full. And the way you design this makes it even more congested. It already is. It's just ridiculous the way you're going about this. Off-street parking. You say you have 31 spaces available for the restaurant. Well, you don't. Taco Bell has 8 spaces to the south adjacent to the restaurant, 2 of which are dedicated for Taco Bell. The remaining 6, that remaining 6 only, are shared with Taco Bell. On the other side, right now, there are 6 Taco Bell spaces next to the entrance for Taco Bell. On the new plans, you've put in 7. You've added a parking space right in front of the garbage container. That'll be interesting. Those are Taco Bell parking spaces. So the absolute max you could possibly do is 16 plus a 22 gives you 22 maximum spaces, and you need 29 on the 5,700 square foot thing. I'm going to continue.
Your time is up, ma'am.
A residential street, the minimum setback should be 15 with daylight planes. The daylight plane should be on Kains. It's really a big deal on a narrow, crowded, congested street opposite multi-use and 2 single-family homes. There'll be no daylight planes according to these plans.
Ma'am, your time is up.
And I'm going to say 2 more things.
No, ma'am,
Where
ma'am,
are
your
the
time
27
is up.
garbage cans going to be? And what is the height of this privacy fence? Because in your pictures, they look like they're 6, 7, 8 feet tall. And you've not specified either where the garbage cans go, 27 garbage cans, and where and how high are these fences.
Do we have any other public comment? All right.
No.
Seeing no public comment is closed, and we'll turn it back to the commission for discussion. Well, I do actually have one follow-up question for staff very quickly. Given some of the public comment, could you guys discuss a little bit about the daylight plane and the choice of frontage? From my look at it, I mean, they are asking for a waiver from it. It looks like from my looking at this, should they take it from the Kains Street side, they would have even more rationale for seeking a waiver. Even more of the building would fall within that, and there would be a greater argument for the waiver. But maybe if you guys could just talk through the thought process for the sake of the public.
Sure. So the definition of a yard has changed in the last few years, but the front yard was the short side of the parcel until recently when it became the approval of the director. But there was nothing, we didn't see anything unique about the shape of this site, and so made the determination last year in the staff report that you saw that that front setback was on Portland. Certainly the individual entrances are on Kains, and we expect that address to be on Kains. If the front setback was defined as Kains, it is likely, as the chair suggested, that the applicant would request waivers to the front and rear setback, and same request to the stoops encroaching in the yard. So we'd still be in the same position that we're in terms of the request for the waivers and concessions.
And just as a follow-up, the proposal right now with the lot line adjustment, it's still treating the 9 units on one parcel. And so will it be sort of condoed parcels on one land parcel, but sort of 9 condoed lots, so that, in terms of vice a hard subdivision where the short side could then be created on the Kains side, if there was a hard subdivision, that would obviously be different than treating it as one sort of land parcel with individual condoed.
Yeah, exactly. So they will need a condo map at some point, but it is, right now, the proposal's for one parcel, and it's not a subdivision into 9
individual parcels. Right. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense that it's the short side of, it's one large lot that 9 buildings are being put onto, and the short side of that lot is the frontage for at least what the code used to say, and the director's interpretation is sort of in alignment with that previous code interpretation. Okay, thanks for that clarification.
And what about that discrepancy between, you said 23 parking stalls?
So, yeah, maybe the staff report's a little confusing here. So when we talked about it in the past, we were using county records, and that had a smaller footprint identified in terms of what the taxes that are being paid. And so that suggested a parking requirement of 23 spaces. Using the survey done by the applicant, it's a 5,700 square foot building, which results in a parking requirement of 29 spaces, and 31 are being provided, including this shared parking agreement with the adjacent property.
Well, and maybe if I can just jump in really quickly, is the department confident that the remaining 2 restaurants are both fully code compliant with regard to their parking obligations after, should this project be approved?
We believe so, and just point out that we haven't gotten any communication from Taco Bell regarding any complaints about this application.
And I would presume we would be looking at least for the restaurant on the corner, we would not be, if the building grew over the years unpermittedly so or something like that, we would be looking back to its original approval square footage and what the approval square footage dictated parking, or at least using that number. And if parking standards have come down since that original approval, it seems to be that sort of standard practice that they don't have to carry a higher obligation. They can carry a current law of the day obligation in parking. Sorry, public comment is over. We're now having deliberations. Are there any other comments?
So if I could follow up.
Sure.
Someone mentioned there's a shared parking agreement between the restaurants. If there's a document to that effect, it'd be good to see it at some point. My understanding is that if there's a future shared parking agreement, it would have to be by separate use permit. That would be a different process than what we're going through right now. Is that true?
I'd have to go back and look and see what exactly the procedures are for shared parking agreements. There is a provision for shared parking agreements, and I just don't remember what.
I think that could be worked out between the 2 restaurants somehow, with city approval or city, I don't know, see what happens, but I think this should be a separate issue from approval of this project, Kains Townhouse project.
If the commission feels like this is a sensitive enough subject that it should be evaluated as part of the city council's approval, you can make your recommendation subject to the city council having a chance to review that, or however you might want to deal with that. It is a separate parcel. It's not the subject of this application, but we could sort that out if we need to.
Well, maybe, oh, sorry, did
Well, I
you?
kind of assume that would have to be sorted out at a future date by other parties, right?
Sir, it is no longer part of the public comment period, and if you continue to interrupt, we will call the police department in and have you ushered out. So please play by the rules here of the public hearing. Thank you. Excuse me. Should we take a recess and call the police department in? Okay, we're going to be taking a 5-minute recess. that the public comment period of this hearing is over, and we are now at commissioner deliberations, and we will not tolerate any outbursts. Hold on for one now.
So,
Commissioner Kains?
so finish on what Ian was mentioning. As much as the point was delivered rather roughly and incoherently, it is kind of an interesting point, though. So if we do, even though we're not focused on the other lot, parking is somewhat tied to this approval process. And I only, I don't have a diagram. I'm just looking at the aerial, so I'm counting 30 spots. And so maybe that might be something that needs to be looked at closer for the city council.
Were those? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and jump in with a couple comments here, if I can back up my comments. But all in all, I just want to comment on the project. This is a state density bonus project. This is a multi-unit, effectively single-family home projects. I don't think in Albany we've seen too many of these, aside from maybe the one we saw this evening, but it is certainly a different housing typology that, the attached townhouse style home. It serves a different demographic than many of the other new units, at least since I've been on the commission, that we've produced. We've produced sort of more apartment style, sort of condo type units, as well as standalone, more sort of custom single family homes. But I do think this is serving a different demographic of housing in Albany that is certainly needed. In terms of the gable roof and the conversation, I do recall sort of at our last meeting when we were looking at this, to me at least, looking across the street, there's an interesting pattern that I do think sort of, there's a little bit of a nod to that, not exactly, obviously there's nothing really in the city that looks like this project so far, but there are those three homes. There are two buildings on the corner that are larger apartment buildings with flat roofs that look like they're sort of twin buildings, and then there are three buildings, the next three across the street, that do really look like, although modified, were likely built around the same time and have a similar sort of a gable roof pattern, and those will be directly across the street and across the Kains frontage, in addition to the one abutting building on Kains on the same side of the street that also has a gable roof. So to me, there is a little bit of logic of where the gable roof pattern is picked up, but I do also think this is a large enough parcel and a large enough development that it kind of is creating a little bit of its own context, and has sort of the ability to really stand out a little bit more so than sort of your typical mid-block infill project. I do like the additional change that was done of sort of staggering the massing a little bit in terms of where the decks and the open spaces are, both for the sort of variation and the architectural variation, but also the added privacy that I think that brings to the decks. I did have one question actually for the architect on the front, the decks that are on the front facing Kains with sort of the sunscreen structure that's there. I was just hoping maybe the architect could come up and talk a little bit about what sort of the vision was for those. The sort of the steel frame almost makes it feel bigger at the street and sort of a larger street wall than it necessarily needs to be. So I was hoping you maybe explain a little bit. I get the need for sun protection, but that can obviously happen in a variety of different ways. Unless there isn't really a vision for it, which is equally fine.
Interesting. I'm not quite sure how to address that. I mean, we felt that there was a need for sun protection, and the steel frame seemed to be the most direct way to deal with it. It's going to be pretty lightweight. I mean, it's possible that potentially that you could lose, you might be able to lose some of the horizontal elements and have just simply the verticals at the ends and still stretch that fabric between them. You follow me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could sort of pull that cable, that sort of catenary curve of that cable across from the vertical posts. And that would sort of soften that top edge. And that's an option I think we could explore.
Thank you. I guess I'll just come on to some of my other comments here. all of the explanations that staff have provided about the daylight plane and the rationale for choosing Portland make logical sense for me. Although and I think, similarly, it's appropriate that the buildings are sited fronting Kains rather than Portland, but I understand the code rationale for why the point was taken where it is. I think with planning code, often things, there are quirks to the code and they don't always align in the most logical of ways for every development site, but I think those code interpretations make sense. I think at the end of the day, I think what's important here is the outcome, is the end product here, the project appropriate for this location, and compliant with all the various regulations, both local and state, that we have to apply here. And I'm overall supportive of the project. I think it's great to be able to get a BMR unit. I know that BMR unit would have been required with an 8-unit building as well, but I think the increased density, it inherently means that these units are a little bit smaller since they're going to 9 units, which I think sort of a teeny bit of affordability by design is factored into that, but also just we do have our sort of RHNA goals that we need to hit and an increase for housing opportunity. And so I think the 9 units work well. The waivers seem logical to me. I understand why they're requesting the waivers, and the concession and incentives also seem to make sense in terms of this project having an increased sort of financial feasibility component. I think there's a use of high quality materials. I think a project like this could have been designed in a much less attractive way, and so I'm very complimentary to how this has been designed and how especially how the end facade on Portland. I really like the thought that was put into sort of the logic of the window pattern and sort of the articulation there. So all in all, I'm supportive of the project and moving this forward. I do think the parking issue just needs to be tied up. My pragmatic feeling is parking can be solved. There's a variety of different ways the parking requirement can be met. From my experience parking in that lot, the spaces are also fairly wide. Perhaps it gets restriped. There's a variety of different ways within that type of a circulation where additional parking can be accommodated. So I think, we need to make sure that the parking is fully code compliant for both accommodating the Taco Bell site and the corner site. So, but to me that seems solvable, and again, this is a recommendation to City Council, so I think we can figure that out, and that to me is also the kind of thing that can be a condition of approval, that there needs to be full code compliance with regard to the parking. I don't think that really directly affects our ability to make a decision on the project here tonight, so I'll leave it at that.
Madam Chair, if I may, just a couple of points. With respect to the parking, my sense from the commission and the public comment we've gotten is it's primarily a procedural concern. It's not that anyone has a real issue with the design of the parking for the 2 other uses.
Correct. I think the issue is it's a numbers game. We want to make sure that it's code compliant.
If we need to go and tie up the paperwork in a little bit tighter package, we can do that. And then with respect to the scale of the housing and I would point out that Albany is recognized as the term that's used as a high-resource community. It's a community with a good school district, and so family-sized housing is an asset. Yes, it becomes a little bit more expensive, but the opportunity for people to move to Albany and benefit from our schools, yes, they're crowded, but still, that's an important part of what the State Housing and Community Development Department is going to be looking at into the future. So it goes both ways. Yes, they're larger, but it does serve a population that would really benefit from being here.
Other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Kent?
Sure. I'll jump right on the landscape plan. So I know it's very rough, but I wanted to comment the street trees are all really small, and I'm not sure why we're planting little teeny trees on that street. They're, in the drawing you showed, they're shown as 30-foot high Legostorium, but those trees are only maybe 20 feet at the most. So they look more grand in the elevation than they would be realistically. So maybe we look at, if you look at San Pablo right around the corner, they have some red oaks, they have some red maples, something bigger and grander. We have a nice planting strip there. I think the way the driveways were laid out, it provides for that extra street parking, but also provides a really nice place for a street tree. So take advantage of that. Other comment, the bike parking issue, I understand the principle, the easier it is to get your bike in and out, the more you'll use it. It's a good point. I think these garages are fairly big with a 20-foot depth and 10-foot wide. So, I mean, we have a fairly long car at 17 and a half feet. Most cars are really around 15 feet, 14 and a half, and even less. So you're going to have that 5-foot gap in the front of the car for bicycle storage, which will help a lot. Depending on mechanical, I'm not sure what's in that mechanical closet, whether that's also storage or it's just,
Are you talking about the closet in the garage?
yeah, right.
And is that the mechanical storage? The sliding door storage
It's mechanical
equipment?
So I'm not sure if it fills that whole space or not, but it's a possibility. There might be room in there. Those are my only real comments. I like the way the decks were flipped. It adds a lot of privacy. That means there's a loss to it because now you're not talking to your neighbor over your deck, but also now you have privacy, so it's a mixed bag. But it adds a lot of variety to the plan, is what we requested last time. It preserves, I mentioned the layout of the driveways, really preserve the on-street parking as much as possible, which is great. And that's about it for me.
Commissioner McLeod?
I'd like to start just by saying I think it's a great infill project. I mean, this is the kind of thing we do want, and this is the kind of thing we do encourage. And this is the corridor where we do want more development. We are going to revamp our city planning code soon to try to get more development along San Pablo Avenue. We have a housing crisis, so I think adding units is great, and families make their way to Albany to live here. Absolutely, for schools. Lots of friends have done it. I've seen them all their kids grow up. There are things I like your material palette. I'm happy with the concession for the stoop. I think that works fine. My only comment about that is you could shorten your interior landing a little bit, make a little bit more room in your garage. Stairs could be pulled forward. The lower unit, it almost looks like a separate unit, the lower bedroom. It's got a counter and looks like a sink. I mean, maybe that's flexibility. Accessible lower unit. That could be ADA if someone entered through the garage.
Sorry, what was that?
It could be an ADA universal design lower bedroom on every floor, although you would have to enter through the garage. But it would be rolling access in and out. Your bathroom there certainly could be ADA sized without a whole lot of disruption to your plan. What else? A few things I'm disappointed with. One is your bike parking, because when I think of families in Albany, I think of what we're trying to do in terms of transit-oriented development. I think it falls way short of the mark, even though you're meeting potentially the letter of the law by putting that little afterthought of a bicycle against the wall. I really don't think you're serving our community well by not providing bike parking for a full family's number of bikes. And there are other places on the lot where you could do a protected bike shed, or somehow make it so you don't have to carry your bikes through your house to the backyard, which I don't think is going to make people use their bikes. Kains is part of an approved bike boulevard now. San Pablo is going to become, hopefully, a protected bike path from Richmond to downtown Oakland. You're within walking distance of BART. You're within walking or scooter or bike distance to BART, to a great commercial street on Solano. Hopefully San Pablo will improve, get more amenities, more housing, more people, better bike access. So I really would not shortchange the bike parking and other scooters. I mean, all that stuff has to go somewhere, especially with families, and even if you have active adults. I have 4 bikes. So where would I put my bikes? There's only one that I can really carry upstairs. a 15-pound racing bike. The other thing, I really don't like the roof line. I see your other projects where you have flat roofs, and I think they look great. I look at this from an aerial point of view, 3.1. I think it looks out of context. I don't see any other roofs like that. I just don't like it as a design element. I don't think it's adding to your project. I don't like that kind of design thinking. Well, oh, we're next to a residential area. We got to put a little, token, domestic element on top of it. I think with future development on San Pablo, that is really going to look out of place when you get a lot of other bigger housing developments along that street, commercial housing above, and they're not going to have little gable roofs on them, I guarantee you. So that is going to start looking out of context and out of place in a future urban corridor, because that will develop. It will take time, but it will develop. The other thing I'm disappointed with is your green building, green point rated. I think that's kind of perfunctory also. I'm very pleased to hear that you'll go all electric. Corollary to that is that as a green building standard, I would propose that you really consider passive house as a green building certification, because it's basically a super air-sealed building, good insulation values, and 24/7 HRV, heat recovery ventilator. I'm sure you're familiar with it as architects. And you lower your energy loads, and you reduce your equipment size, right? So that's where the trade-off and the savings come in that. And I just read the other day that in California, we're now recommended to have safe air spaces inside our houses because of wildfires and smoke. So if you do passive house and you have filtered air, you're creating a safe indoor air quality environment for those kind of situations. So I think it's a win. I think it all works together with electrical and electrification, all-electric building. Would really like to see that happen. The green point rated, with all due respect, it's like falling off a log. You get a lot of those points for following CalGreen. So, I mean, I did green point rated on my house, and I got 231 points. So I think you could do better than 112. But I think if you go passive house certified, I think you'd be way, way, way ahead on energy use and energy savings and good indoor air quality for all your inhabitants. So I would really, really encourage that to happen. Other than that, I'm really supportive of the project. I mean, I would like to see the roof lines change. I don't know how we go about that, but that would be my recommendation.
You know, I want to mention what about, or even, David, parking underneath the stairwell. Isn't there a lot of opening right there? Isn't there a lot of space underneath the stairwell? When you get into the garage, you're already up about 4 or 5 feet. Seems like there's a whole void right there that bikes could go in.
Because, you've got a landing that's halfway up.
Right, so you have high enough for a bike to go under.
We do have a lot of storage in the stair now. We've got the 3 trash bins and the bike.
Oh, trash bins.
Right? So it's being put to good use.
No, under the first landing is up about 4 feet, right?
Yeah, that's true. It's possible to get the trash cans in there, in fact.
Well, I was thinking the bikes under there, but either.
Or bikes.
Yeah, right.
We hadn't thought about that, but that's a possibility. To get cargo bikes and such underneath that. And it might only be about that much clear. That'd be fine.
Maybe, yeah. Okay.
My last comment about passive house is that recently studies have been showing that for multifamily, it's very cost effective.
It's very
For multifamily projects, passive house certification is very cost effective. It's basically,
maybe a selling point.
well, also Turner Institute at UC Berkeley, others have shown that buildings, houses with green certifications do sell for more than standard. So there are market incentives to do these things as well. But I really, one of the things I'm really, really strongly a believer in is transit-oriented development and trying to get people out of their cars and, get kids on bikes, safe routes to schools. I mean, that's how we're going to build community here. So I would like to see, if not at least one space in every garage, maybe there's a bike structure somewhere on the property, or it's hard to access the backyards. You have to go through that other parking lot, which doesn't seem feasible. But, and then finally, I'm not overly concerned about the parking on the other parcels either. I think that can be worked out as well, but that'll be a future item, some other agenda, I think.
Commissioner Kent, do you have any other follow-up questions? We do need to make a motion on the resolution that's before us as a recommendation to City Council. I guess where I am right now is, again, I'm fully supportive of the project. I'll be honest, I don't love the canopy structures on the front. I think they make a lot of sense to me on the backside. On the front, they feel a little weird to me, and I feel a little enclosing of that upper floor. I don't know if other people feel that way. I hear what you're saying on the gable. I do feel, though, we also gave direction at the previous study session that we actually liked the gables, and I know that was before your time on the commission, but I feel a little awkward with us totally switching gears on that, and I understand sort of the tall ceiling heights on those main living floors is probably one of the drivers of that as well. It sounds like the cargo bike issue, which it looks like, just looking at the ground floor, there are probably some fairly simple ways to scooch some things back a little bit and maybe accommodate a little bit extra room for a little bit more intentional bike parking, if that would be a recommendation that we would have to the City Council to ask for that as part of project approval. Commissioner Kent, you had a comment about the trees, the street trees, and the size of the street trees that are being proposed.
Yes, maybe staff can answer this. Are the street trees being directed by the city, or is that something that the client decided?
Yes, so the city arborist is going to be making a recommendation as part of the Parks and Rec Commission hearing, which right now is scheduled for October 10th. My understanding is right now his recommendation is for crepe myrtles.
I'll have to write a strongly worded email. All right, thank you.
Did you have any other sort of conditions of approval or any other recommendations that you wanted to add in as we talk about formulating a motion here?
No, I mean, the facade doesn't bother me, but I appreciate Ian's expertise on that and yours, so I have no other comments.
Does anyone else feel as I do about the canopies on the front? We may all have single issue issues up here that we don't have a majority vote on.
Me. It's kind of a frame that would be individualized, customized by each user. Have hanging pots, plants, could have screens of different kinds. Going back to a Dutch concept where people are allowed to kind of personalize, they have a framework and they're allowed to personalize their front spaces, back spaces, whatever. So I don't disagree with it. I hear what you're saying about having this project here a year ago and giving feedback. So I don't know where we go with that, but I've seen their work with flat roofs, and it looks great, and I'd like to see that here. So I don't know where they go.
All those people who see the flat roofs oppose them.
Pardon?
All those neighbors who are adjacent to the flat roofs in other parts of town, they always oppose them. Can't you do some gables, they say.
Do we?
I like the angled roof, but I'm from New England, so never.
Yeah, the gable roofs to me don't bother me. I do agree, though. I think there's certainly a different design aesthetic that will be more desirable on San Pablo, but I look at this as sort of wanting to distinguish itself from the higher density development that will happen fronting San Pablo and feel a little more like a closer sort of residential character. So I don't know. I like that they're sort of still contemporary and of their time, and they're not trying to sort of be of a different era and seem to be of high quality materials. Do we have enough of a consensus here to get, I I think all three of us need to be on the same page here to make a motion, given down to commissioners.
Well, yeah, I think the city council would probably appreciate you trying to resolve some of these issues tonight. They don't do as much design review as you do, so I would encourage you not to ask them unless you absolutely feel strongly about it. Try to resolve it here tonight to give them clear.
Let me weigh in more clearly. I think a lot of the historic homes in Albany have gable roofs, so it's not really, as you know, it's not a unique architectural type here. And it does it transitions from the single family to what might be in the future higher density residential on the street, which will probably be flat roof. So I'm not so sure if, I mean, flat roof, of course, works with single residential and high density. The angled roof we don't see on high density, but we see it on the single family residential. So this is midway. So I think it's it's optional, and that's why we're having this debate. So it could go either way. I like it. It's rather unique. It gives an interesting profile if I were to look at that as a sculptural element, I think the angles add more interest than a flat roof. So I prefer the angles.
How about then I take a stab at us making a motion then, since I think we've exhausted all of our respective comments here at this point.
Talk a little more about gables and hybrid design. Anyway.
So we need to, just pulling up the agenda here, we need to make a motion to approve the proposed resolution to City Council approving this design review and density bonus application for the the 9-unit multifamily townhouse on Kains and Portland. And we would say add a recommendation that, two recommendations, I guess I will add into this motion for the resolution. One, to modify the garage layout to show a larger space that can accommodate at least a cargo bike on each side, a very intentional bike parking space. And that prior to the city council approving this project, that the parking situation on the other lots are resolved such that there's clear understanding that the result is in a code compliant place.
Can I modify that?
Just to do what?
Well, I would actually like to see more bike parking and some sort of exterior bike shed or something accessible for the whole building, all units. I think that could be accommodated somewhere on site somehow.
Maybe just a quick question for staff. It seems like the only place that could work would be on the Portland side. Would that require a variance for such a structure to be in the front setback then?
I believe so. If it's
It would be in the setback.
It'd be in the setback. It would, is a variance or another part of the density bonus.
Well, maybe we don't need to put prescriptive dimensions around it, but we can say to the city council and give you guys the direction that in advance of going to city council, coming back with maybe a floor plan that shows sort of a stronger bike parking layout that may accommodate more than one bike parking space in each unit, or some larger development plan for accommodating a greater number of bicycle parking spaces within the units is what the Planning and Zoning Commission would recommend to the city council.
I agree with that.
So with those two, so that is, if you guys got that, that would be then the motion that I would make on the resolution to council.
Yes, I second that.
Okay, great. All right, well then with that, we will take a roll call vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Seeing none, that motion for the resolution passes 3-0. And we are done with that item. Please do keep, I guess this is going to city council, so there's no appeal period, but story polls stay up? No story polls?
There are no story polls because structurally it was going to be way too expensive and excessive. And so rather than that, we had them do these Google Earth views, perspective views.
Okay. So then, no appeal period since it's going to the city council anyhow. So that recommendation has passed by the Planning and Zoning Commission. So that ends item 6-2, and that moves us on to new business, item 7 on the agenda, which is none, it looks like.
Very much.
Thank you. Moving on to item 8, announcements, communication. It looks like there are no such announcements on the agenda. Any other announcements? Great, seeing none, that takes us on to the next meeting, which is our next regularly scheduled meeting is Wednesday, September 25th, same time, same place. And with that, we are adjourned.
It was approved at the beginning of the meeting. It was on the consent calendar.